Sam&Cents. Money that finally makes sense. You believe being smart protects your money, so let me tell you about the smartest man who ever lived. He mapped gravity, he invented a branch of mathematics, he ran the Royal Mint, and knew the machinery of money better than almost anyone alive. And in the year 1720, that man did something you would swear you are far too clever to do. He bought one stock, carefully at first. He sold it for a fortune, and then he watched everyone around him get richer, couldn't stand it, and bought it all back near the very top. When it collapsed, Isaac Newton lost a fortune. Not because he was foolish, because of one force his equations could not touch. And that same force is working on you right now. Here's the puzzle this story solves. How does the most rational mind of the age, a man with money, credentials, and a head start, end up buying at the top of a mania he could see forming? The answer is not that he got stupid. Intelligence was never the missing piece. What beat Newton was a social force. The unbearable feeling of standing still while the people around you get rich. Economists have a dry name for it. You know it as the fear of missing out. Keep that in mind, because by the end I'll hand you the 3 written rules that stop it. The rules that could have saved the smartest man alive. First, the machine he stepped into. The South Sea Company was not really a shipping business. Chartered in 1711, it was, above all, a financial engineering vehicle. A private company built to take over and manage a large slice of the British government's national debt. In exchange, it was granted a trading monopoly with Spanish South America. Part of that monopoly was the asiento, a contract to carry enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies. Commercially, that trade was minor. Historically, it is not something to pass over. The era's most celebrated financial venture had human trafficking written into its charter. But the real engine of 1720 was never the ships. It was the debt, and a scheme to make that debt make people rich. Here's the part that made the whole thing combustible. In 1720, the company offered to absorb even more of the government's debt, and it would pay for that debt with its own shares. Follow the incentive. The higher the share price climbed, the fewer shares the company had to hand over for each pound of debt it swallowed, which left more shares and more money for insiders. So the people running the scheme had a direct reason to make the price go up and to keep it going up. They talked it up, they lent people money to buy more of it, and they sold new stock in waves on easy installment terms. The rising price wasn't a side effect, it was the product, and climb it did. These are market prices for the standard £100 share, and sources vary, so hold them as a range, not to the penny. In January of 1720, the stock traded around £128. By late June, it peaked near 1,050. In roughly 6 months, a share had multiplied close to 8 times over, not on profits, not on dividends, but on belief and on borrowed money. Half of London was in it. Dukes, members of parliament, poets, shopkeepers. To be out of South Sea stock in the summer of 1720 was to watch the whole city get rich without you. Remember that feeling. It is the hinge of this entire story. Now Newton enters, and here is the part people forget. He was early, and he was disciplined. Newton had bought South Sea stock before the frenzy, and as the price ran up in the spring of 1720, he did exactly what every rule book tells you to do. He sold. He took his profit, by later accounts a very large one, said to roughly double his money, and he walked away with his fortune intact. Stop the story right there, and Isaac Newton is the hero of every investing lesson ever taught. Got in early, took the gain, got out. If he had done nothing else for the rest of the year, we would hold him up as the model of a rational investor. He did not do nothing else, because the price kept climbing after he sold, and Newton had to watch it. Every week the stock he had just cashed out of went higher, and the people who stayed in, people no smarter than he was, got richer and richer. That is the exact pressure this whole episode is about, and it does not care how many equations you know. So Newton went back in. And this is the honest correction to the old story. He didn't lapse just once, in a single dramatic moment. The surviving records, reconstructed by the historian Andrew Odlyzko in a 2019 study for the Royal Society, show Newton buying repeatedly, aggressively, into the rising market, subscribing to new issues at higher and higher prices through the early summer. He re-entered near the top, and he did it with real conviction. The disciplined man had become one of the crowd, by choice. Then, as it always does, the music stopped. Through the autumn of 1720, the market price of that £100 share collapsed, back down toward roughly £150 to £200, and lower still by the year's end. Everyone who had bought high was ruined in slow motion, and Newton was one of them. How much did he lose? You'll often hear a precise figure, around £20,000, a staggering sum for the time. Be careful with that number. It comes from later family and anecdotal accounts, and modern reconstruction finds the exact figure genuinely uncertain, but the losses were unmistakably large enough to hurt one of the wealthiest men in England. The point is not the decimal, the point is who took the loss, not a gullible novice but the most rational mind of the age, buying at the top on purpose. There's a famous line that always gets attached to this story. Newton, it said, remarked that he could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of the people. It's a perfect line. It's also almost certainly not his. There is no contemporary record of Newton saying it. It surfaces in retellings long after his death, and the polished heavenly bodies version is a later embellishment on top of that. So I won't put those words in his mouth as history. I'll give it to you as what it is, a legend that stuck to the story because it captured something true, that a mind built for calculation had just been beaten by something you cannot calculate. Which raises the real question, what exactly had beaten him? Here's what had beaten him. A mania is not a calculation, it's a social process, a room full of people watching each other, where the fact that everyone else is buying becomes its own reason to buy. Newton could model the force between the Earth and the Moon to a precision no one had ever achieved, but he could not model the force between one person in a crowd and the next. Being right early actually made it worse. He had proof the thing went up, he had the profit in his pocket, and he had to watch that profit look small next to what he could have made. Intelligence didn't protect him. Being early didn't protect him. Even his own initial discipline didn't protect him, because none of those are a defense against wanting what the crowd is getting. That is the force his equations couldn't touch, and the only thing that ever holds against it isn't a smarter mind. It's a rule you wrote down before the crowd showed up. The wreckage was enormous, and it reshaped Britain, but here I have to correct a detail that even careful people get wrong. You'll hear that the collapse produced the Bubble Act, a law restricting new joint stock companies, as if it were the hangover cure after the party. It wasn't. The Bubble Act was passed on the 11th of June 1720, before the peak, before the crash, and it was pushed by the South Sea Company itself to choke off rival schemes competing for investors' money. It wasn't a remedy for the mania, it was a weapon used during it. What came after the collapse was the reckoning, a parliamentary inquiry into the fraud, the confiscation of directors' estates, and the rise of Robert Walpole, who managed the political wreckage and became, in effect, Britain's first Prime Minister. The law meant to prevent the next bubble arrived before this one even burst. Now, the comfortable way to hear this story is, well, Newton got greedy and I'm not greedy, so I'm fine. That is exactly the wrong lesson, and it's the one that will cost you. Newton was not a greedy fool. He was disciplined. He was early. He took his profit. He did everything right. And then a rising market and his own neighbours pulled him back in. If that can happen to the single most rational person who ever lived, the honest question isn't whether you're smarter than the crowd. You're not going to outthink the feeling of watching your friends get rich. The question is what you've decided, in writing, in advance, before the price is climbing and your calm has left the building. So let me bridge 1720 to your phone, and I'll say out loud where the comparison stops. The pattern repeats. A price detached from any real cash flow, driven by a story and by the crowd. Meme stocks, crypto runs, a hot new coin your group chat won't shut up about. And the smart money is in it signal repeats too. In 1720, the cleverest and best connected people in England were all in South Sea stock, and that was precisely why it was dangerous, not why it was safe. But here's where it stops. 1720 had a specific debt conversion mechanic and almost no disclosure or regulation. Modern markets have disclosure rules, regulators, and completely different instruments. I am not telling you a share of an 18th century debt conversion scheme is the same thing as a token or a stock today. The instruments differ. The human wiring, the part that pulled Newton back in, is the constant. That's the only equivalence I'm claiming. So here are the 3 rules, the ones that could have saved the smartest man alive and that take you about 10 minutes to set. 1. Before you buy anything you'd call a sure thing, write down your exit. a price or a date at which you'll sell, and a maximum you're willing to lose. Decide it while you're calm, because you will not be calm later, and a rising price will try to rewrite it. 2. Never add to a position simply because it went up. That single move, buying more because it's rising, is the exact behavior the record shows sank Newton. Being right so far is not a reason to bet more. 3. Treat smart people are buying it as a neutral fact, never as your safety check. In a mania, the smart money being in it is the warning label, not the green light. Write those 3 down. Keep them where the crowd can't edit them. 1 boundary plainly. This has been a true story and a set of general principles. It is not personalized investment advice. Your goals, your time horizon, and how much risk you can actually afford all change what's right for you, and a real plan accounts for them. What history gives you is the mechanism. The most rational mind in the world took his profit, watched the crowd, and bought back at the top. And the loss didn't come from a lack of intelligence. It came from a force intelligence was never designed to beat. Your defense isn't being smarter than Newton. It's the 3 sentences you wrote down before the crowd arrived. So, back to the beginning. The smartest man alive sold at the top of his discipline and then couldn't bear to watch the world get rich without him. He didn't lack brains. He lacked a rule. And the crowd that beat him is the same crowd that's in your feed tonight, promising that everyone but you is already winning. But here's the thing about that force. It doesn't need a once-in-a-century bubble to take your money. It doesn't need a genius to fool. Most of the time it doesn't arrive as a mania at all. It arrives as one small friendly question, asked across a desk, that feels like no risk whatsoever. Next time, you won't be in Exchange Alley. You'll be at a dealership and a salesman will smile and ask you the most dangerous question in modern money. So, what can you pay a month? Same channel. Bring your calculator. So there it is, small boring moves that quietly win. If your money makes a little more sense now, hit subscribe to Sam&Cents. And the next one's right here. It picks up right where this leaves off. See you there.